You know the Magna culture, right? Nobody works for me. You people work with me. I'm working for you. The history of mankind has always been dominated by the golden rule. Here's the gold makes the rule. But I don't want to be dominated by anyone. If I feel that strong, I should not be able to dominate somebody either.
I'm joined today here with the legendary Frank Stronach, Canada's most successful entrepreneur, the founder of Magna International, 40 billion in sales, 180,000 employees, over 440 factories in 34 different countries, also referred to as the Magna Man. Thank you for joining us today on our show, The Road to Economic Freedom. Frank, today we'll be talking about your boldest and probably most important initiative thus far, which is the Canadian Economic Charter, which you are promoting in Canada and believe that Canada could be the first country in the world with a Canadian Economic Charter of Rights. Why is an economic charter so important?
Well, first of all, my mission is to say that Canada is the first country in the world with an economic charter of rights. In essence, I'm saying there is no democracies without economic democracy. Basically, we have Canada's got a great human charter of rights, but in essence, I'd like to say the human charter of rights alone is not sufficient. We have to fortify it with an economic charter of rights. Economic charters of rights will lead to economic democracies, and the economic democracies are the basis for democracy itself. So you can't have democracy unless you got economic democracies. So that's the essence.
To protect the economic freedom of Canadians and to ensure that all Canadians are economically free. What does economic freedom mean?
Well, economic freedom, that's a very, perhaps it's never possible that everybody is economically free because we all grow up in different circumstances, blessed by nature, blessed by so many things here. But I could see at least that 2/3 of Canadians should be economically free. But let me point out, what does that mean, economically free? The minimum, let's say, the minimum standards to be economically free is if a Canadian woman or a Canadian man has worked for 30 years, they should own their own house, might it be a little house or a condo, mortgage-free, with no debt, and should have at least $300,000 of cash in a bank so they can support their old age pension and that they can choose their own road to happiness in their later years.
That's a beautiful idea.
And that's the minimum standards. Because if you're not economically free, you're not a free person. And it's a shame that such a small percentage is economically free.
Especially by that definition, I think many Canadians would think that would be a dream to be economically free in the way that you've defined it.
So we have to ask ourselves, how come? We have advanced so much in technologies to make life easier and produce products faster, cheaper, etc., right? So those are the questions where the economic charter has answers for it, and I guess there's no way out. Common sense tells everyone an economic charter of rights is absolutely necessary. Could it, the economic charter of rights, which I propose, got 7 principles, and I kind of choose the 7 principles because they haven't got a lot to do with politics. It's purely economic sense. I think it's so important that we get Canada, the country, back on a very healthy economic footing.
Are there any other countries in the world that have an economic charter?
No, not that as far as I know. And I had factories in in so many different countries, seen practically world. I do not know of any, no.
Why do you think no other country, and why do you think an economic charter has never been proposed before?
Well, an economic charter of rights, its basic thing is to balance out the human charter of rights or strengthen the human charter of rights, and you will have economic democracy, or the whole point is to eliminate poverty. But I think the reason why we haven't got economic charters of rights is because the world has always been dominated by the golden rule. It still is dominated by the golden rule. You don't see the rulers no more. They might be in Hawaii, they might be in Beverly Hills, they might be in Monaco, but the rulers of the world, they'll call it the very rich, they don't want to share the profits with workers. That's the dilemma. So we gotta find a way to dismantle the chains of dominations. And that means, how can we dismantle the chains of dominations? Alter the golden rule, not via violent revolution, via destructive revolutions, only via revolution of the mind.
Incredible, incredible. So you are now, Frank, launching your fourth book, which is the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights, which lays out the 7 principles of the Economic Charter. And today I'd like to explore the first principle of your economic charter, which is balancing the budget and eliminating debt. Can you first tell us, what is a national debt?
What the national debt is just, I think it's hard to say it's climbing thing here, and I think it's hard to get all the statistics, but I think the national debt is about at least 2 trillion, right? Because there is a Canadian time clock, right? Which records the debt, right? And the debt is, I just made a note that the debt is per day is 110 million per day, just
wow.
But the debt climbs, is like, and the debt increases 40 billion a year. Imagine what you could do for 40 billion, right? Okay, so that's a major. It's so major. I
think it's numbers people can't even comprehend. What is the current number of our national debt?
Yeah, the current number of national debt, I don't know if the provincial debt is included in there. That definitely is not included, the debt what people have, right? But just the national debt, which is the Canadian government, right? The national government, I think it would be close to 2 trillion or a little over 2 trillion, but it daily rises. It rises a year about over 40 billion, right? So it's gigantic. I mean, it's unless we do something, it's hard to imagine that we can ever pay it back.
So why would balancing the budget and eliminating the debt be so important to the average Canadian?
It's a simple reason. Every housewife knows she cannot spend more monies than what her husband brings in, right? If she spends more monies, then they wind up in a poorhouse, okay? Now, every farmer knows he cannot spend more than what he gets for his crops. Otherwise, he loses the farm. Every small business person or people know they cannot spend more than what they make on profits. Otherwise, they lose their business. So it makes so much sense, right? So the more the government is pouring, the more the deeper the hole gets, the more difficult it is to get out of it. So that is the thing. That's why we gotta build. It's grassroots. We gotta put the alarm bells on, right? It should be alarm bells all over. We gotta reduce the debt.
So as you mentioned, I mean, I know in my own household, we can't spend more money than what my husband and I bring in. So why does the government seem to get to play by different rules?
Well, I guess Winston Churchill had a good definition for that, right? And sometimes you look back in history, and you want to learn from that. Did other countries had similar problems, etc., etc.? But anyway, Winston Churchill, which I would say is maybe the greatest statesman, or the greatest politicians we had in recent times, he always said, Winston, his lady has said, Parliament doesn't work because there's only politicians in Parliament. And he said, the mandate of a politician is to be elected or re-elected. So he says, the problem is the whole country is managed by political reasons rather than socioeconomic reasons. And that's why Winston Churchill said to solve the problem would be to create a chamber of citizens which will balance out the politicians in Parliament. But that's a very cumbersome. I think there would be an easier model. In the Economic Charter of Rights basically recommends that small business is the chamber of citizens. If small business does well, the whole country will do well, because small business, they all will play on the same level playing field, which is not the case right now. When you take a look in the Canadian Tax Code book, which is a heavy, with thousands of pages, with thousands of paragraphs, I think they're all kind of written to favor the very rich.
So with balancing the budget and eliminating the debt, what would that look like in practice, and how do we get there realistically?
Well, the only way you could that you could pay back the debt, which we should, and there is still time, right? But we're running out of time, right? To me, it's like go on a boat ride on the Niagara River, and you hear the falls and not too far distance, and you still keep on partying, right? So that's, to me, that's the same. That's the way I see Canada, right? But we could, if we have to change the system, right? It could be that we could be more productive, we could create more things if we let workers participate to bake the economic pie, right? So we are not productive anymore. We don't create wealth anymore, right? Or not to that extent what's necessary to pay back the debt, right? So the only way to pay back debt is if you mobilize the working force, reduce the regulators, reduce the overhead, right? If I work in a factory, I don't have to look at the books. I just see if there's more people in the offices than on the factory floor. I know there's, without looking at the books, I know this company wouldn't make any monies. Okay, so we gotta do something about it, because right now it's like we're leaving our younger generation, our kids, with a gigantic mortgage. Basically you could say it's a mortgage. Matter of fact, it's worse than a mortgage, because let me give you an example. Let's say there's a couple and they have 2 kids, and let's say their house is valued, it's what, $500,000, but for some reason or the other, they got a mortgage of $1 million. If the parents die, what? The kids will not, they will walk away from the house. They will not pay for something $1 million, which only is what, $500,000. And we have many situations like that, right? When a country has debt, then the whole nation is liable to pay it back. There's many examples, right, where countries gone bankrupt, and then
What happens when a country defaults
when
on
the
its
country
debt?
gets back, then the government or big banks and et cetera, will impose restrictions. And
On the citizens.
on on the whole country, including the working class, the rich, the thing here. Everybody is affected by it, right? And they would close. They would demand restrictions. The living standards will sink, and thing. But most countries have been able to come out of it a little wiser and know they cannot have that.
How does our current debt affect Canadians today? Because I think a lot of people think the government spends money to help us. There's social services that help stimulate the economy, provide food for people in need, provide services for people in need. But how does this debt actually affect our day-to-day lives?
Well, it basically means that the country has to print monies. Okay? And when you print monies, usually the wages don't go along with it, or don't. So it's the living standards will deteriorate, right? Okay, because there was when you look in maybe back 100 years, right, or 90 years, they were great. Where for a loaf of bread you had to pay maybe $10,000, right? There was at times so much money printed that's the way it was. So everybody would suffer, but most of all, the working class will suffer the most, because the very rich always have some ways out where they pay less hurt. But the rich also get hurt, but not to the extent than the working class.
If we dedicate ourselves to this plan and we're able to eliminate the debt within the next 20 years, as you propose in the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights, what will families like mine gain?
Well, family will gain, basically, the 20 years, it takes a plan, right? You cannot come in with the chainsaw and say, look, now we pay back 10%. So we could start out maybe with 1%. The next year we increase it to 2%, then to 3 and 5. But anyway, in 20 years we should have paid back the debt, right? And the country or the younger people would see then that the living standards will climb, right? Okay, so it's to have that for politicians it's absolutely the wrong way to go about it, right? But I know a lot of politicians. They're basically honorable people. They want to do well, but they're trapped in a system, right? And where they can't do anything, right? Look, on my board, I had many. I had Brown Mulroney, the former Prime Minister, was on our board. Mike Harris, the Premier, Bill Davis. I had many politicians, so I knew most of them, good people, but they were trapped in a system, and still are, that they can't really. So basically, the way it happens is, there's a lot of young politicians. They're full of good spirits and full. I want to change the country. I want to change such and such and such a thing. So when they sit in Parliament, right, in their own confines, the older politicians say, "You cannot say that because it's new. It could be criticized, and we won't be elected." And if the other politicians get elected, they make it worse. So that's the reason they're rational. We got to break that cycle, because that cycle gets us deeper and deeper, and we got to break that. A politician can truly debate economic issues, because it's so important to have a balanced economy.
Well, as you mentioned, most politicians come in with a good heart, hopefully, and an initiative to make Canada a better place. And most of them promise fiscal responsibility, but the debt continues to grow. How would the economic charter hold our leaders accountable so that this principle isn't just another empty promise?
Well, the very key is, in order to change things, timing has to be right. Right in that case, timing is bad for the people because the timing is the economy is going to be so bad that the fridges of the working people be maybe half empty, okay, most likely half empty. That means there is hunger, it's be a tough life, right? Okay, so the timing, but then people would wake up if the new good idea is coming forward, right? The second thing besides timing is you need a constituency. That means you need a group of people which have been very handicapped and or so tied up in red tape that they couldn't move. And I'm speaking now on behalf of small business, right? Small business is so tied up in red tape they can't move. Huh? So basically, but small business, they try to, that means they're a little step up from the general public, right? And so basically the message I want to get across is the small business are so important. You hold the future of Canada in your hands. And if you love your kids and you love your country, you gotta do something. You gotta get off and be active, right? And by active, I mean when small business bands together, right? There's about 1 million small business. They would have a huge voting bloc, right? Okay, and small business would say, because people see always things from their point of view, right? Mm-hmm. But small business, what's the economic charter? What does that mean to me, right? Or to my family, right? But basically, we recommend small business should not pay any business tax because small business does not make a lot of profits. Small business, they want to grow. They rather than paying maybe $50,000 or what, they rather hire maybe some employees, okay? And the employees would pay the wage taxes or income tax. And when you take a close look, governments make more taxes with income tax, right, than with the business tax, right? So that means let the entrepreneurs, let the small business owners, let them buy new machines, let the money be in the business to grow the business, right? That's so crucially, it's very important to understand. And if small business does well, the whole country would do well. So I want to cry out loud to small business. You gotta get together for the sake of your kids, for the sake of your country. You gotta form an association. You have a huge voting blocks. Just vote for 2 areas where they are the key areas on the economic charter. To be elected for a politician, they need the votes, right? So if small business should demand by the politicians, they support the economic charter of rights. If they be elected, they would move when the economic charter of rights is brought forward in the House of Parliament. So the politicians which make a promise, because they want to be elected, right? So they know there's a huge voting bloc out there. They want to be elected. So that would change. That's the only way democratically to change the rules of a country.
How do we keep the politicians accountable once they get elected?
Well, that's why I'm saying we like to get, right? We have forms which are printed, which we say to the politician, look, you gotta in order that we will announce it, we will promote, or we will say that you will be, that you will endorse it when you get elected, that you will vote for the economic charter. Mm-hmm. If you don't sign it, then we said, look, you're the problem. Why the country's got a problem, right? And we don't need problem makers in Parliament.
Mm-hmm. So through this initiative, Canadians will be able to see what candidates coming up in the next municipal, provincial, federal elections support the Canadian Economic Charter, and they can choose which way they want to vote.
We started, the municipal might be earlier. We might be flush it out. We might go to the mayors and councillors and say, look, because you're the municipalities, you're affected on the first line because Ottawa is lesser, all the bureaucrats get the same monies, everything, it's loaded with things. So, in the smaller towns, then the mayor and the councillors, they got to listen to all the problems families have, businesses has. So they got to bear the brunt. So they should have a great interest to what can we do to avoid a major recession.
The municipal government is the closest government to the people. Do you think that they would endorse this? I mean, they already have to have a balanced budget.
I hope it makes so much sense. And let me say that the core of the economic charter is, and there's one thing where all politicians agree is, and business people agree, and people will all agree, if the economy doesn't work, nothing else will work. If the economy doesn't work, you cannot feed the hungry. You cannot look after the most fragile people, the elderly, the sick, and the handicapped. So it's so obvious if the economy doesn't work. It's so obvious the economic charter of rights is the only way to get the economy started again, right? So it's, I think municipal politicians should easily see it. Like if they would not sign it, I would worry on their mm-hmm. call it on their brain power, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it starts there. So we gotta get the municipal people motivated, the provincial people, and the federal, right? Because the economic charter goes right down to the municipality.
And Frank, you believe that small business could be the catalyst to spreading this message across Canada?
Small business is the catalyst. Small mm-hmm. business is really, they have some understanding, right?
Economic understanding.
Yeah, the economic understanding. They know they can't. There's so many rules and regulations. Just when you start out, that a lot of people can't start out because the rules and regulations cost monies, and practically need a lawyer, right? So it's just geared up that you can't. So we must look back. Canada was such a great country 50, 60, 70 years ago. When I came, it was great. You didn't need that many rules, everything. So let's look back. Canada was there, and it's, an ordinary couple could afford to buy a house and send the kids to school and go on vacation, etc. None of that is feasible now. We gone backwards to such an extent. I think our living standards are maybe only half what they were 50 years ago.
What went wrong?
Well, what went wrong with too many regulations, right? You had to call it the signs are there where you see when the first computers came out on the market 50 years ago, the slogan was, if you got one of those computers, you could eliminate a total office floor of a high-rise building. Now when I look around, there's 20 times more high-rise towers in the cities, right? What do you think they do in there? They don't make products in there. It's regulations. We're way over-regulated. But I want to point out, we want to have a civilized society or civilized country. In Canada, we got to try to keep it civilized. every citizen's got the right to find a job, whatever the openings are. So I'm not pointing out that's the fault of the regulators or the bureaucrats. I'm just saying we must change the system. There be not a firing thing here. Basically, I'm saying to be very civilized, we could have a hiring freeze. I want to appeal to the bureaucrats and regulators. Yes, we need some regulation. Yes, we need some bureaucrats. But you have kids too. Don't you worry about the kids? So there be a very civilized, be a hiring freeze, right? The same as we can't pay back the debt. You know, we have a formula where we can do it, and we have a formula where we can have a very civilized. You know, a society does need some bureaucrats, right? Okay, where we could create a very civilized structure.
You have a very feasible, non-chainsaw approach to eliminating the debt and to reducing bureaucrats. As you said, a freeze, as well as reducing the debt by 5% a year. Is that what you propose?
Well, it's to begin with, we might have to put a little less than 5%, right? We might start out with 1%, because just imagine now to have it balanced, right? And then pay it back many billions, right? So we have to maybe start out with 1%, 2%, and as we grow, there could be maybe those later years could be 10%, right? Because the debt is much smaller.
What do you say to people that believe that the government needs to continue spending money because we need those social services in place?
Well, it's maybe for certain things, maybe like many roads are important, and many roads are, for instance, private, right, by private corporations, right? Okay, there might be things. There's many ways, but in most thing here, it's you know, roads. Many things should be owned by the citizens, not by private companies, right? Okay, but we can do it if we let workers participate, right, making the economic pie. So I'm not preaching to take away from the rich. I'm preaching we should let workers participate. And let me give an example. When I put in at Magna the corporate charter of rights, right, what the corporate charter of rights said, the foremost principle was what we do with the profits, right? So we allocated 20% of the profits to the shareholders. Then we allocated 10% of the profits to the workers, to the employees over and above their wages. We allocated 6% to management. We allocated 7% for research. Research is the foundation for the future, and 2% for charity, because in communities know where we had factories, we always interfaced with the communities, and that's why most of the charity monies come back to the communities where we had factories, right? So we had a lot of factories in Aurora, Newmarket area, so I think they all can testify that Magna was a great corporate citizen, right? And people were happy, etc., etc. So all those things is, in essence, I'm saying I created a great industrial model, which we could copy it, the country could do well, right? Look, there's nothing in for me. My kids have everything they need. I have a certain age. I can't take it along with that, but the country's been great to me. It's such a great country. I had factories, we had over about 450 factories, many factories in over 30 countries. I've seen every country. When we're young, we are hustle a bit to make some monies, but in order we can live in dignity. So I could live in dignity in many different countries. Canada is such a great, I think we can do it, huh? But just listen, it's more business, and everybody else try to be try to get part of the economic charter. You don't have to pay anything. Just call, I want to be an ambassador of the Canadian Charter. I want to preach it in my area. I want to preach it in my family. I preach it in my community. The economy, without an economic charter, we cannot eliminate poverty. And it's crucial, right, that we eliminate poverty. Okay.
All Canadians can get behind this, and they can get behind this without paying any fees to join as a member. And
it's for the benefit of all Canadians. Again, we are not saying to take away from the rich. What we are saying is when we engage employees in making the economic pie, that they get a portion in a tangible way, then you release such an energy by the workers, right? When they're in the front line, they can see how to make things better, right? If they know they get in a tangible way a portion. When I put in this corporate constitution where the employees get 10%, of the profits, our profits climbed the first year 40%, the second year 100%, and the third year 200%. It's all there. It's so obvious. But it's obvious that we could eliminate poverty, and the great amount of Canadians could be economically free, and the ones which are not economically free, it's got to be civilized that nobody should go hungry. Everybody should have a shelter to where they could sleep with their kids or family. So those are the minimum standards of a civilized society, right? But I think if we do it right, I think the greatest amount of people, I would say about 2/3, could be economically free. And remember, the minimum standard is you own your own house or condo, mortgage-free, and that you have at least $300,000 in your bank to subsidize your pension. And you could look forward, choose your own road to happiness for the years you still got left to live. So everybody wins. So again, small business, wake up. You got kids, you kid up. And most of all, you can make monies, you can make monies if you dismantle the chains, the red tape. If you band together, you bring it about, you're gonna not pay a business tax, and you practically no rules. Government has no business in small business. That should be the motto. Government has no business in small business, right? Yeah. Small business, I should say, is 300 employees or less. Mm-hmm. When small companies get larger, then they have to share the profits with the employees. While they're small, they know they gotta share. If we let's say got smart workers, hard workers, you gotta give them bonuses, or you gotta give them a portion of the profits. Mm-hmm. You gotta give them a portion of equity. That's what I did, right? So basically, I'm there. I wanna share my wisdom and experiences with the Canadian people, because
we're really grateful for that.
Yes, right? But I'm very grateful, and sometimes I'm saying a silent prayer. Look, I've been blessed with good health and a good mind, but I've also said it doesn't matter how smart you are. If the stars are not aligned, it won't work. But let's see, if we band together, the stars will be aligned. Again, small business. You hold Canada's future in your hands. Think about it, because you are the most to gain from it, and rightfully have to gain, because you put in the effort, mm-hmm. You put in the ideas, you put in your soul, you put in you borrow some money, you put everything, you got a right to gain. All right, so let's be behind it, mobilize. Let's get that grass fire going, right? Because it's a grass fire movement, right? Okay. So the economy. If the economy works, we can feed the hungry, and we could eliminate poverty. Okay, thank you for that I could express myself, and it's delightful. Your questions were great, Iwona, and let's do it again and again and again.
Incredible, Frank.
Okay,
thank you
you
so much. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for proposing an economic charter. It puts a light at the end of the tunnel. I worry about my children. I worry about the future. I worry about small businesses leaving this country, and we can stimulate the economy. We can keep small business here, and we need all Canadians to band together. We need small businesses to step up, and we need every Canadian to join the Canadian Economic Charter at canadianeconomiccharter.ca. Thank you so much for joining us. Frank, thank you as always for your insights, and thank you what you've done for this country and what you continue to do.
I look forward to the next session.
Thank you, Frank.
Okay.